Florence Carlyle, a Canadian artist born in 1864, lived here in Woodstock on Wilson Street in a home that their family called Englewood. When it came to pushing boundaries, as an artist and as a woman, it was considered unacceptable for the path that she chose at the turn of the last century. Through the magic of technology and imagination, we're going to journey back to 1905 to interview this dynamic Canadian to learn more about her life and her art in a piece we call The Life Within. Welcome, Miss Carlyle. May I call you Florence?
Yeah, my friends and family call me Bird, but yes, Florence is fine.
That's an interesting name. How did you get that?
Well, I have always been small in stature, and as a child I was constantly darting around looking at things. It must have been true because the name stuck.
Oh, it sounds like you must have had lots of energy as a child here. So Florence, your family moved from Galt to Woodstock in 1871 when you were 7 years old. Tell us a little bit about what was going on in Woodstock, which was a busy agricultural center of some 4,000 folks. What was it like growing up then?
Well, my father was the county school inspector, and my mother had been trained as a teacher. She was the principal of the ladies' department at the St. Austin's Institute in North Carolina before marrying my father. I was the eldest daughter in a family of 7, 4 boys, 3 girls. We all attended the Literary Institute, which believed in educating girls as well as boys. By the time I graduated in 1886, it was called Woodstock College.
That was unusual for its day. Most girls were not educated and were raised, groomed to be wives and mothers.
Well, with 5 younger siblings at home, I certainly had lots of opportunity to learn about domestic responsibilities. But I still had time for fun. I loved riding and playing tennis. I know I was fortunate to be raised by parents who believed that all children should have an education. And some background in the arts. We all played piano, and we all knew how to sketch and paint. Although I was definitely the best at drawing people. However, only my brothers went on to university at McGill.
When did you know that art was going to be central to your life?
Well, as a child, I had more than the average interest and talent, I must admit. I was constantly looking at things and wanting to recreate what I saw. My mother took notice and often gave me watercolor boxes as birthday gifts. When I was about 10, she arranged for an artist from London, Ontario, to come to Woodstock to teach a group of us. She even rented a space for the classes. Later, I studied with Ida Joy, who was from Tilsonburg, not far from here. She had studied at the Académie Julienne in France and was the first woman to have her work exhibited in the Paris Salon. Wow. I think it was then that I realized that with proper training, I could fully realize my natural talents. When I was 17, we moved to Englewood House on the outskirts of town. I loved it there and used the Red Barn as my studio, although it was freezing.
It probably proved to be very difficult to work in that kind of environment.
I didn't mind wearing the extra layers. I loved having a place where I could work uninterrupted, and soon there were art pieces everywhere.
What did you do with them?
I entered all kinds of fairs and competitions. I sold a few and won a number of prizes. My big breakthrough, as it were, came when I was 19. My sister and I had entered about 15 pieces in various mediums at the Toronto Industrial Exhibition in the ladies' work department. It was so exciting. There was an electric train and the fairgrounds were lit with electric light.
Did I hear correctly? You were in a ladies' department?
Yes, our work was exhibited in a separate building. It was mostly decorative arts and handcrafts. Crewel work, embroidery, painting on china, that sort of thing.
What happened at the exhibition to change things?
Princess Louise, the wife of the Governor General, bought a piece of my work.
Wow.
Whitewater lilies on ebonized wood. It was a huge honor, and I offered to give it to her, but she insisted on paying and taught me a very important lesson, that I too should value my work and deserve to be paid for it. It was reported in the Toronto papers, and I was a little bit of a celebrity for a few days.
I also understand that you have a rather famous relative.
Yes, Thomas Carlyle, the Scottish historian and philosopher, is my great uncle. I must admit that his name opened a few doors for me later in my career, but I'd rather be known for my work.
So what did you do? Because you're only 19.
After graduating from the Literary Institute, I began teaching art classes in Woodstock, and for 7 summers, I taught at Grimsby Park near St. Catharines.
What, pray tell, is Grimsby Park?
It was a huge park run by the Methodist Church with hotels and cottages that provided lectures about science, politics, and the arts. Visitors could expect musical acts, theater performances, sermons, lawn bowling, and art classes. As many as 50,000 visitors would attend during the summer. Teaching was considered a respectable occupation for women who were unmarried.
So I understand, but many young women were already married at 19. Were you getting any pressure from parents or peers?
Not from my family, although I'm sure my mother was questioned and my father would have preferred it. I loved painting and knew that my career as an artist would always take priority over marriage. And I was fortunate to have a number of young women friends who, like me, wanted to have an independent professional life. They created the Saturday Reading Club, which I joined when I returned from Paris. We provided a lot of support for each other.
And I understand that several of your members went on to careers in literature, writing, and journalism.
Yes, it was an exciting time, but also difficult. It was considered unseemly for a woman to be ambitious. But together, we found the added strength for our resolve.
The art historian Deborah Cherry even used the word matronage, a play on the word patronage, to describe women supporting other women who were seeking a professional identity.
Well, we certainly challenged the idea that women never stick together. But my mother was always my biggest supporter. I think on some level, she regretted having to give up her teaching career. My uncle was living in Toronto, and when I was about 21, she arranged for me to go there to become qualified as an art teacher by the Ministry of Education. We studied model drawing, linear perspective, blackboard drawing. It was so exciting to be living in a big city. We even took a trip to Niagara Falls. But the best part was being surrounded by other like-minded people who loved art.
Sounds wonderful.
It was. And while it also made me realize that I was fully able to teach, I wanted to learn.
We know that Oscar Wilde was traveling in Canada in 1882, talking about the decorative arts. He spoke in Woodstock that year. Did you learn anything from his aesthetic movement that you incorporated into your art?
Yes. Annandale House in Tillsonburg was built with those concepts in mind. I began including vases and other decorative pieces into my work. In one I called The Studio, I painted a woman wearing an oriental dressing gown reclining on a divan. I included several vases, a cup and saucer, and a conch shell. She's even reading an aesthetics magazine.
Most of your work features women. Why is that?
There are a number of reasons. My mother, sisters, and later my friends were a large part of my world, especially when it came to supporting my passion for art. I've always preferred the softer, more organic lines of the female figure, and they were willing models. My sisters were always excited and flattered to see how I had portrayed them in my works. And I was exposed to the world of women on a daily basis. I knew it intimately. I enjoyed creating an awareness, a celebration of the tasks performed by proud, confident women that largely went unnoticed. It was during my training in Paris that I finally realized how much I truly enjoyed figure drawing. I found it easy to duplicate an inanimate object, but bringing life to the figure in a portrait was a challenge to my abilities, and I loved it. Each model presented different curves, light, shadows, fabric textures, and energies that as an artist I would try to capture and interpret, whether she was hanging laundry or dancing in the garden.
Tell us about how you managed to get to Paris to study. Was it not frowned upon for young women to travel unaccompanied?
That is true, but I knew that if I wanted to grow as an artist, I had to have better training, and Paris was ultimately the place to go. An artist from London, Ontario named Paul Peel was living in France and had recently become very well known for his painting After the Bath. And that year of 1890, he and his sister Mildred, who was also an artist, had returned home to visit family. It was reported in the local papers, and my father actually managed to set up a meeting. Paul showed us the paintings that he had brought home for an exhibition, and I loved his work, especially the image of a small girl struggling to carry a heavy baby. I could feel the weight of that child. How had he done that? I was anxious to know.
How could you possibly afford to go to Paris?
I had saved the money I made from teaching art classes in Woodstock and St. Catharines. It was widely known that Princess Louise had purchased a piece of my work, so I had no shortage of students. My father was not very supportive, and with 7 children had no money to spare. However, my mother had begun taking in boarders, students at Woodstock College, and had saved that money for me. If I was frugal, I could live for a year. So, despite my father's disapproval, and with encouragement from the Peels, I booked passage.
How'd that feel?
I must admit that I was suddenly terrified. On one hand, Paul's stories of the ateliers, or artist studios, and the inspirational teaching of the great masters convinced me this was an opportunity I must take. On the other hand, I was from a small town in rural Ontario. I was afraid of appearing gauche and inexperienced in this most fabulous European city. It was a tumult of fear, joy, and marvel. I was going to Paris.
Indeed you were. Did it live up to your expectations?
Yes. It was the summer of 1890. I was 26 and had rarely lived away from home. The Peels helped me find accommodation. A respectable English hotel was well beyond my means, and I wanted to experience the real Paris. I rented an apartment au troisième on the Rue de Milan, an area that Monet had often painted. It was up many flights of stairs. I can still picture the white walls, large mirror, blue lounge, and the view of rooftops from the French windows.
Did the Peels set you up with a school?
No, we agreed that I would make my own arrangements. Many of the established art schools did not take women students, and those that did charged women twice the fee as men, as we would be taking a spot from a man. And it was considered very unlikely that a woman would be expected to do more than use art as a hobby.
Oh.
However, the ranks of professional women artists were growing, and the Julienne schools had special ateliers for women.
So how did you go about choosing a school?
I was unhappy with the first atelier I chose, and one day literally stumbled upon the Académie de l'Écluse, strictly by chance while I was out for a walk. It was smaller, but had mixed classes of both men and women from all over the world. It was such a change from my life to this point. I was now living alone, catching a horse-drawn bus in the early morning hours of Paris, smelling fresh baked bread being sold from carts, seeing steam rising from braziers, and catching glimpses of the Seine and Notre Dame through the mist. Glorious pictures everywhere. And then arriving in a class where people were speaking French, Italian, Spanish, even Russian. My life in Woodstock seemed worlds away.
Can you give us an idea of what your day was like?
We would arrive each Monday, don our blue or gray blouse typical of French studios, check our palette, brushes, charcoal, and then wait to see which models would be chosen from the many who would clamor outside the studio, and which positions they would choose. As your name was called, you chose your spot for that week, from the high stools at the back of the studio to a stool right at the model's feet. You then drew a circle with a piece of chalk around your spot. We were literally shoulder to shoulder. In a few minutes, the noise of international chatter would be replaced by the grating and scratching of charcoal.
You said you were going to study for a year, but you stayed for 6 years, and you toured around Europe quite a bit. How could you have afforded that?
My older brother, William, was now a successful engineer, and he sent me money. I also began to sell a few pieces and even got a few portrait commissions.
What did you learn from your summer painting sessions abroad?
I improved my landscape skills on a summer visit to Brittany and was drawn to the amazing faces of the older women living there. I was accepted to the famous Académie Julienne, where we studied anatomical correctness using nude models, creating space, handling light and shadow, so many things. We had the masters like Monet to learn from. My teachers felt I was progressing very well, and in 1893, I decided to submit a piece to the Salon.
What was the Salon?
The Salon was the annual showcase for the Société des Artistes Français in the Palais de l'Industrie on the Champs-Élysées. Several thousand pieces were displayed, and several thousand more were rejected by the jury. Getting your work into the Salon was essential for a young artist. It was the first time that the public would see your work.
What did you submit?
I had done a portrait of an elderly Dutch woman who was my neighbor. When I showed it to the critic at the Académie, he said that it was terrible, that my perspective was all wrong. I was shattered, but determined to improve. I went home, scraped it all off, and started again. In 2 weeks, I had completed a new version, just in time to submit to the jury. This time, Monsieur Bouguereau was pleased with my work and permitted me to submit. After 3 agonizing days, I was informed that Une Dame Hollandaise had been accepted. I was ecstatic.
I'm sure you were. What did you do then?
I cabled the great news to Woodstock immediately. My younger brother Russell raced to share the news with my father, who was addressing a solemn meeting at the town hall. Russell burst into the room, waving the cable and shouting, "It's from Bird! Her picture is in the saloon!"
Little brothers. So what was the Salon like?
The Palais was a huge building with high ceilings, and hundreds of paintings were displayed in rows from the ceiling down to the floor. It was said that if laid side by side, they would reach 8 miles. Because there were so many paintings on a wall, the position of a painting was very important. My worst fear was that it would be skied in the top row nearest the ceiling. It wasn't skied, but it wasn't in the best tier at eye level either. However, I received many favorable comments about the strength and intelligence I had captured in the old woman's face. I wasn't interested in conventional feminine beauty. I was more interested in the emotions and the inner life of the subject. I had even greater success with a painting I did the following year called La Vieille Victorine, made from sketches I had done in Brittany the previous summer. It was hung in an even better position, and my instructor, Monsieur Tony Robert Fleury, said I was his most promising pupil.
Yet in 1896, you returned to Woodstock.
Yes, I opened my studio at Englewood, and the next year I was elected as an associate member of the Royal Canadian Academy. I was now an established artist and exhibited my work wherever I could. For the next 3 years, I saved up the money I made from sales and commissions and moved my studio to Greenwich Village in New York City in 1899.
What was that like?
My family was surprised and not happy. They thought I had come home to Woodstock to stay. But I wanted to grow, and New York offered an environment where I could work as an artist. I had to live frugally, but window shopping and public galleries are free. I couldn't resist fabric sales, though. Rich satins, silk tulle, velvet, fabulous to wrap around a model. I had trunks of it. And I had always paid my models, even if they were friends or family. I paid $1 for a full day and 50 cents for half.
That was good pay in 1900.
Sitting still and holding a pose is hard work, and good models were difficult to come by. I was lucky to have friends and family that were willing to model for me, and I didn't want to take advantage.
And what were you painting?
Well, as they say, men and women who have to live by their art must paint what is certain to sell. That meant rural scenes and landscapes that would sell at exhibitions. I won the Osborne Calendar Company competition in 1904, which provided me more opportunities to exhibit my figure work. I returned to Woodstock during the summers and worked on a piece I later called the Tiff. My younger brother Russell and friend were the models. I painted them around the dining room table. Russell was laughing so hard I had to paint him with his back turned.
So they weren't quarreling after all, as the title suggests.
I did the sketches at the table, but for me, art needs to tell a story, and somehow a romantic quarrel evolved. And that story is what captured the audience and the judges at the Royal College of Art in 1902. It is a large canvas and was hung opposite the entrance at the Ontario Society of Artists' 30th annual exhibition. I was awarded the $200 prize, but the even greater award was that it was purchased by the Ontario government for $1,000.
That's a great deal of money for you. And it was also exhibited in St. Louis at the World's Fair in 1904.
Where it won a silver medal. I was overwhelmed, to say the least.
I'm not surprised. It was said of you that your ambition is all for art itself, and your aim is to progress and do better work. How do you respond to that?
For me, the challenge was always to find the inner life within the subject and paint so that others could see it too.
It's wonderful when an artist can achieve recognition in their lifetime. But you did this at a time when women were rarely acknowledged as professional artists. You had to learn not only to advance your artistic skills, but also to market your own work. While you often painted women with children, you never had any of your own. Looking back over your life and career, is there anything that you might change?
Not a single day.
Ms. Carlyle, thank you very much.
The year is 1905, and Florence is buoyed by the recent sizable sale of her painting, The Tiff. There is much ahead for Florence. In 1911, Florence's father suddenly dies, while she and her mother are in England visiting her brother William's family. She moves her studio from New York City back to Woodstock to care for her mother, her constant supporter. Her mother dies in 1912. There is now nothing to tie Florence to Woodstock or to her adopted home of New York City, where she sought to get a working wage for her talent. In 1913, Florence's beloved home, Englewood, is sold, and she moves to England, to the village of Crowborough, which is about 56 kilometers south of London, and takes up residence in Yew Tree Cottage, along with her good friend, Juliet Hastings. There's no way that Florence could know that Britain would soon be engulfed in World War I, and that she would be living with greatly reduced income. With the war on, nobody was very interested in purchasing art. Her painting materials were hard to find, and her investments failed. However, she had a number of pieces that she offered for sale as a fundraiser to the local Red Cross. And in later years, she and her friend Juliet devoted much attention to hospital work. Good news was waiting. In 1919, Florence was commissioned by the Canadian War Memorial Fund to do a painting of Lady Drummond of the Canadian Red Cross. And this particular painting can be seen in the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. With failing health and a reduced ability to paint, she turns her studio over as a rest home for nurses and turns her attention to writing. She sold a number of works and exhibited a number of them as well from 1919 to 1922. Her life was taken from cancer in 1923 at the age of 58. It seems a long way away, the Paris Salons, the Ateliers, the Académie de la Cluse, but her life will live on in the many paintings that are exhibited in places like the National Gallery in Ottawa, the Art Gallery of Ontario, and galleries around the world. And of course, the largest collection of her work here at the City of Woodstock Art Gallery. As an artist and as a woman, she is truly a Canadian original.